10 days before Thanksgiving, I discovered that my son was planning to humiliate me in front of everyone and throw me out of the house. So, I changed the plan. On November 27, my son called and asked, "Mom, where are you?" I laughed and told him, "Why don't you open my drawer and see for yourself?" What he found in there made him scream. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. I'm Margaret Hayes, 66 years old, widowed, and a retired civil engineer with 40 years of work behind me in Arizona. That afternoon, after my routine checkup, the doctor let me go home early. I came in through the back door, set my bag on the chair, and took off my shoes, just like I always did. On the refrigerator door hung my handwritten Thanksgiving schedule, a list of dishes, the turkey roasting time, the names of relatives who might come. I picked up a pen, added cranberry sauce in the corner, then closed my notebook. I walked through the living room toward the stairs. At the foot of the stairs, I stopped. From upstairs came Lydia's giggle, followed by Ethan's voice low and fast. My hand rested on the wooden railing. I held my breath. "The doctor signed it," Lydia said, her voice dropping, proud like showing off a trophy. "He listed all the symptoms." "Then we're good," Ethan replied. "After the guardianship hearing, everything's under our control. This house first, then the accounts. Guardianship, I knew that process. The court could hand decision-making power to someone else if they deemed the owner no longer mentally competent. One stamp, one signature, and I'd be pushed to the sidelines of my own life. I heard the shuffle of papers, the tapping of a pen on the desk in my office. Lydia's voice poured more oil on the fire. "If we get it done before Thanksgiving, that'd be perfect. All the guests will be there witnesses. She won't be able to argue." I didn't move another step. Couldn't let the floorboards creak. I backed down, slow and steady, walked straight into the garage, sat in the driver's seat, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I stared straight ahead, counting slowly from 1 to 10. This wasn't the time to panic. I reminded myself, breathe in, breathe out, no tears. No confrontation. When my heartbeat steadied, I went back inside. I opened the cupboard, took out the kettle, and made coffee. No music. As the water boiled, I poured it slowly, standing by the open stove, listening to the soft trickle. A few minutes later, Ethan and Lydia came downstairs, acting perfectly normal. "Mom, I invited Uncle Ben's family for Thanksgiving," Ethan said, rummaging in the fridge for milk. "And the kids, too. That okay?" "Sure," I said evenly. "The more, the merrier." Lydia leaned her elbow on the counter. "I'll do the grocery run on Saturday. Can you make me a shopping list, Mom? So I can be ready. There's already one on the fridge." I pointed to the calendar. "Remember to grab a pumpkin pie on Saturday." Ethan looked up at me, his eyes scanning my face for some sign. "How was your checkup?" "Fine. Blood pressure's good." I took a sip of coffee. "You staying for dinner?" "Yeah," he said. "I'll tidy up your office before we eat. It's a bit cluttered." I set my cup down. "Don't touch the right-hand drawer. That's where the receipts are." "Of course," Lydia smiled. "I'll just straighten up a little." Dinner passed in fragments, talk about work, turkey prices this year, holiday traffic. I nodded, served more mashed potatoes, listened to them talk. In my mind, I cataloged everything in my office, every file, every folder, every sheet. Lydia could slip into her pocket without a sound. I kept breathing in rhythm. When they went upstairs, I stepped out to the backyard. This was where my husband and I used to sit at night, planning home repairs like small projects. He used to say, "One step at a time." I looked up at the dark window of my office. Inside, they had just plotted how to erase me from my own life with paperwork. I clenched my fist, nails pressing into skin. I went to my room, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, reviewing tomorrow's tasks like a construction checklist: verify the house deed, call the lawyer, contact a realtor, open a new account. No distractions, no haste. Then I stopped at one detail, Lydia's voice saying, "All the guests will be there witnesses." They wanted an audience to corner me. They wanted me stunned, unable to react, so their plan would slip through cleanly. I closed my eyes and let my shoulders sink. If they needed the bright lights of a family dinner to trap me, I'd turn them off before the meal began. I wouldn't tell anyone. I'd keep my routine: rise early, brew coffee, add another note to the fridge. I'd wear normalcy like armor. No arguments at the table, no shattering plates, no scenes of tears and paper ripping. I wouldn't play the part they wrote for me. I sat up when the clock was nearing midnight. Barefoot, I went to the cabinet, took out a pair of rubber dishwashing gloves, strapped the small headlamp to my forehead, the one I usually wore when fixing hinges or checking pipes, and stepped into the garage. The recycling bin stood against the wall, its lid neatly closed. I pulled it to the middle of the concrete floor, took a deep breath, and switched on the light. The bin was full of cardboard from delivery boxes, junk mail, and grocery flyers. I slid my hand in, moving through the top layers, keeping my breathing steady. The smell of damp paper and ink was sharp and stale. Then there it was. A folded packet of papers wedged between a pizza box and a coupon flyer. I pulled it out. The edge was greasy. At the top of the page, bold letters read, "Emergency petition for guardianship." I straightened up and stared at those words again, just to make sure I wasn't imagining them. Emergency meant asking the court for a quick, temporary ruling before a full hearing could even take place. I opened the pages one by one. Every blank was filled in: my name, my birth date, my address. Under reason, it said, displays cognitive decline, forgetfulness, poses danger to self. Signed at the bottom, Phillips, MD. I had never met this person. Along the left margin was another handwriting, fast, pressed, impatient. I knew Ethan's writing, even though he tried printing in block letters. Notes listed in order: accounts, checking, savings, retirement, house, $680K, timing, file before Thanksgiving, summon after dinner. An arrow connected the last line to the words, witnesses, Lydia plus neighbor, if needed. I leaned back against the cabinet, both hands gripping the papers. No sound except the hum of the water heater. I reread the doctor's signature, ink smooth, name printed with license number. I folded the document back the way I found it, then took my phone from my coat pocket. The screen lit up, reflecting my face, a woman who hadn't slept, hair grayer than last year, but eyes sharp and fully awake. I laid the papers on the bin lid and took photos of each page. I didn't use any fancy apps, just made sure each shot was clear, square, no glare, then hit upload to the cloud storage account my husband once set up. Back then, he said, in case something ever happens, keep a copy somewhere no one can reach. I never imagined that something would sound like my son's voice in my own office. When the upload finished, I opened notes on my phone and typed, save time 12:38 a.m. Nov 16. I deleted the photo history from recent, double-checked the upload destination, then refolded the paperwork. I slid it back into the trash pile exactly where it had been, closed the lid, pushed the bin to its place. My face stayed still, no trembling, no trace left behind. In my life, I had felt this kind of focus many times before and learned the discipline of perfect calm during investigation. But I never imagined I'd need that skill to investigate my own son. I switched off the garage light, walked through the kitchen, poured some water, and drank in small sips. The glass made a dry sound against the counter. In my bedroom, I opened the drawer, took out my black notebook and pen. Sitting at the desk, I turned on the lamp. Page 2 of my 10-day plan lay before me. I drew a vertical column on the left timeline. I wrote the first entry, Friday. A note beside it. Evidence secured. Emergency petition plus handwriting plus doctor's name. Next line, verify ownership, house deed, sole name. Then, lawyer call in the morning. Realtor find discreet, accepts cash. At the bottom, I wrote in italics, leave before the holiday. No one suspects. I leaned back, listening to the pen roll across the wooden desk. I didn't write anything sentimental. I didn't add why he did it. That question changed nothing now. A structure was cracking at its foundation. My job was to keep it from collapsing, not to debate the design. I stood, went to the bathroom, and turned on the light. The mirror showed my reflection, silver streaks glinting through my hair. I looked myself in the eye. Fear? Yes. Anger? Yes. But most of all, a straight line cut through my gaze, a decision that wouldn't bend. I placed my hand on the sink and whispered, just loud enough for myself to hear, don't let them suspect. Stay normal until the very last minute. A faint sound drifted from upstairs, maybe the wind, maybe someone turning in bed. I turned off the light, cracked the window open, letting the night air dry the room. In the dark, I thought about what I'd just read, the word dementia wedged between my name and a stranger's signature. I had drawn factory layouts, measured load stress on steel beams, calculated concrete fatigue through 30 summers. No one had ever called me declining. Before they could label my mind unsound, I'd seal their plans shut with the right paperwork. At dawn, I woke before the alarm. I brewed coffee, set the kettle on. Ethan and Lydia were still asleep. I spread the Thanksgiving calendar on the counter and added Brussels sprouts. In the lower corner, just another sign that everything was perfectly, boringly normal. I tucked the rubber gloves back into the drawer under the sink. All traces of the night before were gone except for one line in my notes app and a set of images stored where no one could ever reach. Coffee poured into the cup. I opened my black notebook and looked at the 4 bullet points from last night. Time to make the call. I picked up my second phone, new SIM, used only for this, and stood in the corner of the kitchen, dialing the number I'd saved under Rebecca P. The line rang 4 times. Rebecca Pierce speaking. "This is Margaret Hayes," I said plainly. "I need to sell my house quickly and quietly. There's a guardianship plot using forged documents. I have evidence. I need to move before Thanksgiving." There was a short pause, then Rebecca's voice came firm and direct. "The deed is in your name only?" "Yes, just mine." "No court order restricting transactions?" "Nothing yet." "Then you have full authority to sell," she said. "Bring your property documents and one form of ID to my office. We'll work with a notary today. I'll be there in an hour." "And listen carefully," she added, her tone dropping lower. "Fast, clean, discreet. From now on, all communication happens through the phone you're holding and a separate email account. Don't use your old channels. I understand." I hung up, opened the drawer, and took out the envelope with the original deed and my driver's license. I slipped it into my handbag and zipped it shut. Ethan and Lydia were still asleep. I left a small note on the fridge: "Buy pastry for the oven." I wrote it slowly enough that my hand wouldn't shake. The notary's office was in a low-rise building in Phoenix. Rebecca met me in the lobby, hair neatly tied back, a thick folder tucked under her arm. "Let's go to the conference room," she said. No small talk. Inside, I opened the envelope and laid out the documents. Rebecca checked each page carefully, matching names, address, and parcel number. She scanned them to create digital copies. "Good," she said finally. "I'll contact the notary to prepare the necessary verification forms for the sale. You'll sign limited power of attorney forms today, authorizing me to act on your behalf when needed. They're strictly for this transaction. Nothing beyond that. I just want to get this house out of their reach," I said. Rebecca nodded slightly. "Your priorities come down to 2 things, speed and secrecy. For speed, we'll need a cash buyer who can close in a few days. For secrecy, we'll use a broker who doesn't leak. I know someone, Mark Jenkins. He handles quiet deals like this. Are you willing to trade a little value for time?" "I am," I said. "Keeping the house means keeping risk. Selling fast means safety." Rebecca gave a thin smile. "Good. Here's the limited power of attorney. Read and sign. I'll call Mark right now." I read every line. The terms were clear, scope tight, pertaining only to inspection, receipt acknowledgement, and coordination with the notary. Nothing hidden. I signed, my pen steady and straight. Rebecca dialed, put the call on speaker. "Mark? I've got a property in Scottsdale that needs to move before Thanksgiving. Sole ownership, clean title, seller wants discretion." Mark's voice came crisp and alert through the phone. "Square footage? Area?" Rebecca looked at me. I gave the address. "I've got an investment group looking in that area," Mark said. "They're cash buyers, can close fast if the price is reasonable. I need them to inspect within 2 days," I said, leaning closer to the phone. "And no one breathes a word of this. If there's a leak, I walk away immediately." "Understood," Mark replied. "Let's meet at the cafe near your house at 10 a.m. Bring the keys so my inspection team can work while you're out. I'll bring the contract draft." 10 o'clock, agreed, I said. After hanging up, Rebecca handed me a small slip of paper with a handwritten email address and a temporary password. "Use this to communicate with me and Mark," she said. "Don't use your old email. You can change the password later." "I'll do it as soon as I get home." "One more thing," Rebecca said, meeting my eyes. "Tell me everything you have, evidence, threats, any document with a doctor's signature." I summarized it all, from the recycling bin to the handwriting in the margin, to the unfamiliar name, Phillips, M.D. I showed her the photos on my second phone. She scrolled through each one, nodding. "Enough to destroy any fabricated story," she said. I left the office and drove back to Scottsdale. At 9:45, I walked into the corner cafe and chose a seat by the window. Mark Jenkins arrived right on time, short-sleeved shirt, slim briefcase. He shook my hand and looked me straight in the eye. "I've spoken with 2 investors," he said. "If your property checks out, they'll move immediately. But in return," Mark added, "the price will be at or slightly below market. A small discount keeps things fast and avoids financing complications. I accept." I slid the house keys across the table. "These open every room. Upstairs is my office. Don't touch the right-hand drawer. I want everything exactly as it is." "I'll tell the inspection team," Mark said. "They're professionals, they won't snoop." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a sample contract. "These are the terms we use for cash deals. Key clauses include a short inspection window, no major repair demands, and a guaranteed closing date. If the buyer backs out, they forfeit the deposit. If the seller withdraws, you refund it plus a small fee. I'll send this to your attorney for review." "Rebecca will handle that for me," I said. Mark jotted quick notes in his planner. "Inspection this afternoon or tomorrow morning, depending on the team's schedule. Deposit within 24 hours. If everything runs smoothly, we can close before Thanksgiving." He looked up. "You don't have to be present during the inspection. I'll supervise personally." "I need to keep my routine normal," I said. "Being home would raise questions. My son and his wife still think I'm just preparing for the holiday dinner." "Then let me handle everything," he said, tapping lightly on the spare phone I'd set on the table. "You just answer this phone and use the email Rebecca gave you." I nodded. "I won't text from the old number, won't send anything from the old email. Everything goes through this channel." We both stood. Before leaving the cafe, Mark added, "I've reviewed the recent sales data around your neighborhood. If we list slightly below market, the investment group will skip most of the red tape. Speed is our top priority." "Speed," I repeated. And silence. That afternoon, Mark texted, "Inspection team, arriving at 2 p.m. I've already accessed the house." I replied with one word, "Received." Ethan and Lydia were at work. I stood in the kitchen, slicing apples, the radio on with the afternoon traffic report. The rhythm of the house stayed perfectly ordinary. At 3:15, Mark called. "House is clean, structure solid, they like the location. I'm waiting on final feedback. We'll likely have an offer tonight." "I'm home," I said. "If anything needs signing, we'll meet at the same place." That evening, while Ethan and Lydia watched TV in the living room, the spare phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I went into my bedroom, locked the door, and read the message. "Offer, cash, closing before Thanksgiving. Price slightly below market, as discussed. Deposit within 24 hours. See, attached contract." Below it was an email from Rebecca. "Terms look good. I adjusted the penalty clause to your advantage." I opened the file. The lines lay steady like beams aligned in place. I signed electronically, following Rebecca's instructions. A minute later, she called. "It's done," she said. "I've sent it to the buyers. They'll wire the deposit tomorrow. For now, keep everything normal. If anyone asks, say you're reorganizing the kitchen for Thanksgiving. Don't change your routine." "I won't change a thing," I replied. That night, I added a short line in my notebook. "Contract signed. Deposit 24 hours. Then I closed the book and listened to the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. That evening, the first after signing the offer, I kept the rhythm of the house exactly as usual. Lydia spread out papers, planning the menu. Ethan tapped his fingers on the table like marking time for a rehearsal. "Mom, should we make the traditional green bean dish this year?" Lydia asked. "I'm afraid we won't have enough food." "Do it," I said, reaching for the calendar taped to the fridge. "Turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie." Add a tray of Brussels sprouts for balance. Ethan glanced at me. "We're at 13 guests now. I called Uncle Ben, Aunt Karen, and the kids. Do we have enough chairs?" I did the math. 16 chairs, 3 extra. Set the rug over there for more room. Suspicion flickered in his eyes, then faded. I added a few lines to the calendar, letting him see my handwriting still straight, still even. Nothing out of place. The next morning, I met Mark at the corner cafe. He arrived early, a thin envelope already on the table. "Here's the detailed inspection schedule and the adjusted contract Rebecca just reviewed," Mark said. "The buyers are eager. If we can close on time, they'll transfer the deposit right away." "I need them in the house when no one's home," I said. "Today at 2 or tomorrow morning? They're both at work." "Fine. Give me the spare key." I set the key down, sliding it across. "The office is upstairs. Right-hand drawer stays untouched. I'll know if anyone moves it." Mark nodded, asking nothing more. "You'll get a text confirmation within the hour." He pushed his envelope toward me. "Everything's in order." By noon, I was at Mark's office signing the addendum, notarized on the spot. The notary read each clause aloud, pointed to the signature lines. I signed neatly, no small talk. When we finished, Mark placed a small slip in front of me. "File number MGH1127. That's all you need to remember." Outside the building, I called Rebecca. "Notarization done." "Good," she said. "Now the banking part. Open a new account at a different bank. Have the statements sent to a separate mailing address. I recommend a nearby P.O. box. We'll keep everything compartmentalized, no leaks." "Understood." The bank I chose was in Mesa, far enough that no one would run into me by chance. I opened a checking account and a secondary one, setting statements to go electronically to my new email and paper copies to the P.O. box. When the banker asked if I wanted investment advice, I shook my head. "I need cash ready when the deal closes," I said. I got home right on time to start dinner. Lydia was washing lettuce, Ethan scrolling his phone, occasionally glancing my way. I told an old story about our first Thanksgiving after his father died, how we'd over-roasted the turkey. They laughed softly, then went back to their screens. The table was quiet. I sliced the bread, my hand steady. Late afternoon, Mark texted. "Inspection team in from 2-3, no interior photos, technical report only." I replied with one word, "Received." Then deleted the thread, keeping only the note, "File, MGH1127, written neatly in my black notebook under transactions. The slip came sooner than I'd hoped. After lunch the next day, I carried a folder from my handbag upstairs to store it in my locked backpack. I had just set it on the desk when Lydia appeared in the doorway, holding a stack of invitations. "Mom, I'm working on the guest list," she said. Her eyes swept across the desk, stopping on the black folder. "What's that?" "Sample cards," I said evenly. I pulled the folder toward me, opened the left drawer, and took out a stack of blank invitations. "What do you think of this size? If we print a turkey photo in the corner, will it look too heavy?" She stepped in, laid her list down, picked up one card. "Looks fine. I'll get some gel pens to make them prettier." "Do that," I said. "And remember to buy extra napkins. We almost ran out last year." She nodded. Her eyes made one last pass over the desk before she left. I took a short breath. The right-hand drawer stayed silent. That night, I heard Ethan's footsteps on the upstairs floorboards. He stopped outside my office door. The lock turned, it wasn't locked. The drawer slid open. I counted silently, 1, 2, 3, paper rustling. He was searching. I'd already planted a folder labeled Old Will Draft Copy, dated far enough back to seem legitimate but worthless. A decoy. I heard the chair move, pages turning. I pictured his face relaxing as he read. A few beats later, the drawer closed. Footsteps receded. The next morning, Mark called while I was wiping the counter. "Deposit transferred. Buyer wants to close earlier than planned." "How soon?" 2 days before Thanksgiving. I've just emailed the tentative schedule Rebecca's CC'd. "I'll check through the new email," I said. Rebecca called next. "Everything's safe. They waived several conditions. We just keep the schedule tight and communications clean. No sign of movement on your side. I've also revised the penalty clause if they delay." I opened the email, read every line, and wrote the transaction note in my book. Escrow, MGH, 1127, close, 11/25, 2:00 p.m. With a red pen, I underlined one line beneath it, "Leave house." That evening, Lydia arranged her pens and stacked the invitations. "Mom, I want to print everyone's names," she said. "Looks more professional." "Sure," I said, "but keep it simple. Don't draw maple leaves all over." Ethan looked up and smiled faintly. "You're as strict as ever, Mom." After dinner, I washed the dishes slower than usual, keeping the rhythm steady so they'd see nothing had changed. When they went upstairs, I wiped the counter dry, opened the spare phone, and deleted every message thread with Mark, keeping only the email escrow MGH1127 saved in my documents. I closed the laptop and locked the drawer. On the fridge, the calendar still spoke of turkey and cranberry sauce. Inside, the legal machinery had already set the clock. The next morning, I drove to Mesa to collect the key to the P.O. box. On the way back, I stopped to buy Lydia a pack of fine-tip markers, a small gesture to keep the mask intact, the image of a mother fussing over party supplies. At home, I placed the pens on the table. "Here, these will make it neat," I said. She smiled, thanked me, and bent over to write the guests' names. I passed behind her, turning off the half-played TV. My hands were unnervingly calm. That afternoon, Mark texted again. Buyer confirmed full transfer to escrow. Closing set for 11/25. I'll send final notary schedule. You don't need to be in the house. I replied, received, deleted the message. Then wrote another line in my notebook. Final notarization, 11/25. By this point, the conflict inside me had sharpened. On one side, the mask of calm I'd worn for days. On the other, the chain of transactions spinning faster by the hour. I held both, letting no sound escape. Lydia had nearly found the files I steered her toward invitations. Ethan had rifled drawers the old Will bait had soothed him. For now, every detail sat perfectly in place, tightened like a bolt. And in the thin hush of the house, I heard myself whisper, "It's time." I woke before dawn. The house was silent, swallowing every sound of my footsteps. 2 suitcases were ready from the night before. One neatly packed with clothes, the other slim, holding documents and the black notebook. I locked the door quietly, keeping my hand on the key until I heard the soft click. No note, no trace. I drove straight to the Hilton Garden Inn in Phoenix, checked in with my ID, paid the deposit, and hung the Do Not Disturb sign on the door. The notebook lay open on the table, my backup phone and charger beside it. I checked the entry. Escrow MGH1127, closing 11/25, 2 p.m. Everything in place. Before leaving home last night, I'd placed a thick envelope in my desk drawer with Ethan written on the front. Inside were notarized copies of the sale contract, the escrow deposit receipt, a summary timeline, and a single note written in black ink. "The house no longer belongs to you." I sat down and opened the voice recorder app. Every call from this point on would be evidence. I looked at the screen. Not yet 8. I waited. Near 11, a family group text popped up. Lydia saying, "First guests just arrived," reminding me to drive safe. I didn't reply. I stood, stretched my shoulders, drank half a bottle of water. In my mind, I pictured the dining table at home. White plates, folded napkins, knives aligned to the right. Everything staged, waiting for the actors to enter on cue. Their script was ready mid-meal. They'd announce, "We're just worried about Mom," then present their emergency guardianship petition, with a few guests nodding as witnesses. I had already read that script in Ethan's margin notes. Today, I rewrote the ending. Around 2, the phone buzzed. Ethan. I hit record, turned on the speaker, and set the phone on the table. "Mom, where are you? Everyone's here." His voice was tight, trying to sound calm. "I'm calmer than you are," I said. "Open the top drawer of my desk. There's an envelope with your name." "What?" The sound of his chair scraping back. Lydia's voice came faintly. "What's going on?" I said nothing else. The recorder kept rolling. I stared out the hotel window at the low roofs and distant signs. From the speaker came hurried footsteps, the creak of a door opening, the drawer sliding out. Silence then, the rustle of paper. I heard Ethan's breathing change short, uneven. "Lydia," he called, voice breaking. "Come here." "What is—" Lydia started, then stopped. Pages turning. A notarized contract. Dated. Ethan, yesterday. Downstairs, the background chatter dimmed, like someone had turned the volume down on the world. Chairs scraped. A child said, "I'm hungry." Someone coughed softly. Thanksgiving had just fallen off its axis. "No way," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "She can't. She didn't." Paper tore slightly. Deposit receipt. Escrow. It's in. Lydia stammered, grasping for words. Ethan, calm down. We tell everyone she's... Don't speak, I said evenly into the phone. Read everything first. Lydia's voice trembled. This note says, "The house no longer belongs to you," she read quietly. Ethan, what do we do now? The air on the line was heavy as steel. I let them sit with that weight for a few seconds. Then I spoke the final line, slow and clear. Everything was finished yesterday. Happy Thanksgiving. I ended the call and stopped the recording. Saved under, call, Ethan, 11/27, 2:03 p.m. I set the phone down. The hotel room hummed with the steady breath of the air conditioner. The ceiling light cast a small, calm circle of white. I drew the curtain halfway, leaving a narrow band of daylight. People call moments like this freedom. The phone buzzed nonstop. I didn't answer. The messages piled up, gray and spinning like water in a drain. I replayed the recording softly, chairs scraping, drawers sliding, paper rustling, my son's voice cracking. The sound needed no narration. It was proof. Half an hour later, Lydia called. I didn't pick up. Then a message. Mom, we need to talk. What you did is illegal. I forwarded it to Rebecca with one line. They found out. I'm staying put. Her reply came fast. Stay silent. I'll handle it. I opened my notebook and wrote under escrow, call Ethan, recorded done. I drew a line beneath it. Phase 1, complete. I leaned back, shoulders loose. Relief came late. It wasn't sweet, it felt like removing a temporary beam from a construction site. The weight gone, but the floor still trembling. I didn't think about the words, Mom, I'm sorry, which might come someday. I thought about the courtroom, the judge's bench, the day their petition would be dismissed for lack of cause. I closed the notebook, clicked the small lock shut, the sound clean and familiar. The phone rang again. This time, not Ethan or Lydia, a relative. Margaret, I heard dinner at your place went sideways. Are you all right? I'm fine, I said simply. We'll talk later. No explanations. No persuasion. I didn't need an audience. I unplugged the charger, stood, and went to wash my face. In the mirror was a woman with faint shadows under her eyes, silver hair tied neatly back, steady hands. I looked straight at her and said quietly, The family play ends here. The week after Thanksgiving, I moved into a small, temporary apartment near Camelback Road. The room was modest, a single bed, a wooden table, an old swivel chair. I spread my black notebook on the table like an engineering blueprint. Then suddenly, the phone buzzed. My children had begun their counterattack. Local news alerts flashed on the screen. Young Scottsdale couple files, emergency guardianship petition for widowed mother, concerns over dementia. The photo showed a suburban house. No names, no faces. But I could smell the narrative they were crafting. Rebecca called. They filed the petition, she said. They're claiming you're mentally impaired and were manipulated into selling your house. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for Thursday at the Maricopa County Court. I'll be there on time, I said. Not just on time, Rebecca replied. Be there with a complete file. That afternoon, I sat across from her in a small conference room. She placed a thick folder on the table labeled Hayes Response. Then she opened it page by page. First, she said, 3 cognitive evaluations from 3 different doctors, 3 different facilities. They examined you, asked the standard questions, tested your memory. Each concluded you are fully competent. I've notarized certified copies. I nodded. Second, the Thanksgiving Day call recording Ethan's voice, acknowledging the contract and the escrow deposit. Clear audio. I'll request it be played in court. Third, the scanned copy of the emergency guardianship petition you found in the recycling bin, Ethan's handwriting in the margins. And the signature of Phillips, MD. We've already submitted a verification request. So far, there's no record of any medical examination between you and that physician. She arranged the documents in order, marking tabs with a highlighter. Medical, recording, forgery. She slid the folder toward me. If the judge asks you anything, answer briefly and directly. No long explanations, no anger. Let the paperwork do the work. I understand, I said. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse hallway was just busy enough for the echo of footsteps to bounce off the walls. I sat beside Rebecca in the front row. The door opened. Ethan entered. tie neatly knotted, eyes scanning the room. Lydia followed close behind, a tissue already in hand. They looked at me for half a second, then looked away. The session began. The judge, a calm-voiced man in his 50s, confirmed everyone's identity. Ethan's lawyer spoke first, smooth and practiced. Our clients are concerned that Mrs. Hayes is experiencing cognitive decline and has made erratic financial decisions, specifically the rushed sale of her only home. Their sole intention is to protect her. Lydia dabbed her eyes lightly and said just loud enough for the microphone, "We're afraid Mom is a danger to herself." Rebecca stood. "Your Honor, we have medical documentation confirming Mrs. Hayes is fully competent," she said, handing the folder to the clerk. "Additionally, we have an audio recording of a phone call that took place on Thanksgiving Day." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The sound played through the courtroom speakers, chairs scraping, drawers opening, the rustle of paper, and then Ethan's fractured voice. "Deposit receipt, escrow." "It's in." Someone in the back row cleared their throat. Lydia's head dropped lower. Rebecca stopped the file at that exact moment. "One more exhibit," Rebecca said. A scanned copy of the emergency guardianship petition found in Mrs. Hayes's home, containing the petitioner's own handwritten notes listing accounts, home valuation, and file before Thanksgiving. We have also submitted a verification request for the physician's signature, Dr. Phillips. There is no evidence he ever examined Mrs. Hayes. Ethan's lawyer interjected. "A one-sided recording cannot demonstrate the respondent's mental state." "We're at a preliminary hearing," the judge interrupted. "My task is to determine whether an emergency exists." He turned to me. "Mrs. Hayes, would you like to make a statement?" I stood, hands clasped. "I just want to live in peace," I said slowly, clearly. "In my own home. I sold it to keep that peace." The courtroom went silent for a few seconds. The judge took notes, glanced through the documents, looked at Rebecca, then at Ethan. "There is no convincing evidence that Mrs. Hayes lacks capacity," he said. "On the contrary, the medical reports and the sequence of events indicate she knew exactly what she was doing. Therefore, the court denies the emergency guardianship petition. If the matter continues, it will follow normal procedure. And I caution the petitioners, be careful with any claims involving medical documentation." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Lydia inhaled hard tears, still clung to her lashes, but didn't fall. Ethan gripped his briefcase handle, frozen, unsure where to turn. Rebecca bowed slightly to the judge, then gathered the files. Outside, the hallway felt wider. I walked beside Rebecca in silence until we stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I exhaled. "Thank you," I said. "This is only the first round," Rebecca replied. "They might go public media, social networks, even file new motions. But now you have solid ground." We crossed the parking lot. Phoenix's dry wind whipped across the concrete. I opened my car door and set the folder on the passenger seat. Rebecca leaned against the roof, looking at me. "Do you want to stop here?" she asked. "Or go further?" "Stop, and we hold our position, wait them out. Go further, and we countersue, demand legal costs, and push the forgery claim exactly where it belongs." I glanced at the rearview mirror. My face fit cleanly within the frame, no blur left. "It's my turn now," I said quietly. Rebecca nodded, as if hearing the gear shift of an engine. "Then we start tonight. I'll draft the paperwork. You prepare a full, detailed timeline from the moment you overheard their plan, to the recycling bin, to the Thanksgiving call. No omissions. No embellishments. We win with precision." I started the car. The engine hummed evenly, steady. Earlier, they'd thought they could use the law as a club to reclaim what had slipped from their hands. Now, it would be that same law, cold, exact, and written in black and white, that would strike their weakest point: evidence. 2 months after Thanksgiving, the neighborhood grew noisy in a different way. That morning, as I walked past the row of oak trees, a neighbor turned her face away when she saw me. At the corner, my phone buzzed nonstop. A friend had sent me a link to Ethan's social media page. Beneath an old wedding photo of him and Lydia was a long caption: "We've suffered emotional abuse for years. My mother has threatened to make us disappear. We had no choice but to seek guardianship for our own protection." Below it were pitying comments, a few angry ones. I read until I reached the phrase, "threatened to kill," then stopped. I took a screenshot and sent it to Rebecca. She called immediately. "Don't respond. Don't report. Leave it to me." "I'm staying silent," I said. "I know exactly what they're doing." That afternoon, Lydia called the police. 2 officers knocked on the door of my temporary apartment. "Mrs. Hayes?" The older one, gray-haired, flipped open his small notebook. "We received a report that you broke into your former home in Scottsdale around 9 p.m. last night. I was here all evening," I said, opening the door wider. "If you'd like, I can show proof I checked into the Hilton Garden Inn in Phoenix last night and stayed until morning to sign some documents. Here's the coffee receipt I paid with my card at 9:27, and here's my phone's location log." I laid everything on the table one by one: a copy of the bank statement, the hotel's confirmation email, and the phone's movement record. The younger officer asked permission to photograph them. The older one nodded. "We'll verify these. Anything else you'd like to add?" "Yes," I said, "that any recent claims of trespassing or threats are false. I've avoided all contact. Every communication goes through my attorney." They thanked me and left. I poured a glass of water, set it down, and listened to the faint tap of glass against wood. I was angry, but it was a contained anger, framed tight. I couldn't even muster more if I tried. Whatever emotion I'd had for my son was spent too much disappointment, too much fatigue. How could he do this to his own mother for money? He wasn't worthy of being my child anymore. I texted Rebecca. Police came. I provided alibi, hotel camera, card receipt, location log. "Good," she replied. "Wait for their conclusion. No overreaction." 2 days later, the gray-haired officer called back. "Mrs. Hayes, we've checked. The hotel footage confirms your stay. The receipt matches. They claimed you entered through the back door alone, but their description doesn't match the replaced structure. We've marked the report as false accusation, case logged. If it continues, we'll forward it to the prosecutor." "I understand. Thank you, officer." That evening, I walked around the neighborhood. Porch lights glowed onto the lawns. The smell of grilled meat drifted in the air. A man on his front porch stopped me. "I read what your son posted," he said. "Is it true?" "The court already dismissed the guardianship petition," I said. "I'm competent. The rest will be handled legally." He cleared his throat and looked away. I'm sorry if I overstepped." He turned and went inside. The next day, Rebecca sent me a screenshot of a leaked internal email. Lydia's insurance company had opened an ethics review, her name now appearing in a court file involving falsified documents. No comment, no preamble. I read it, then set the phone down. No joy, no sorrow, just another mark on the map. That night, I sat at my desk and flipped open the black notebook to the page titled "Timeline After the Holiday." I added 3 short lines. "Ethan fabricated threat to harm on social media." Screenshot saved. Lydia filed false break-in report. Police concluded it was untrue. Neighborhood sentiment shifted. Distance, avoidance. I locked the notebook, stood up, and opened a drawer. Inside was an old photo frame my husband in the workshop, hands dusted with sawdust, lips pressed as if calculating a measurement. I set it on the desk. "They chose the law to destroy me," I said to the photograph, my voice steady, like giving a report. "Now I'll use the law to teach them what justice means." The next morning, I went to Rebecca's office, a small conference room with white walls and a glass board. She pulled up a file on the screen labeled "Countersuit Draft." "We have 2 main fronts," Rebecca said, pointing to the board. "Defamation for the public claims of death threats and emotional abuse, and medical forgery for the guardianship petition, bearing a doctor's signature without examination. The secondary claim is for $95,000 in damages, legal fees, reputational harm, and costs incurred defending against false accusations." "I don't want to exaggerate," I said. "Base it only on actual damage." "That's exactly what we'll do," Rebecca replied. "Your strength remains the same. Precision. I've prepared the exhibit's audio recording, screenshots, the police report, hotel verification, bank records, all notarized. What do I need to do?" "Just sign. And stay silent. Let the file speak." An assistant entered with a neatly tabbed stack of papers. I went through each page. The sentences weren't pretty, weren't dramatic, carried no scent, they were straight as steel beams. Rebecca pointed to the signature line. "We'll file today. Once it's in the system, they'll have to respond." I'll also notify the prosecutor about their false police report. I signed. The ink ran clean and even. Then I looked up. Do you think they'll escalate? Without a doubt, she said. When people hit a wall, they either stop or slam their heads harder. The rest is my job. Yours is to wait and stay on the line. Leaving the office, I walked across the parking lot. The air was dry, the sunlight pale. My phone buzzed a strange number. I didn't answer. A text followed. Mom, why are you doing this to me? No name, but the line breaks were Ethan's. I forwarded it to Rebecca, adding, continues direct contact outside legal counsel. A day after the filing, the gray-haired officer called again. Mrs. Hayes, we forwarded the false report documentation to the county prosecutor for review. You'll be notified if further action's taken. Yes, I said. Thank you. That evening, Rebecca texted, filed and served. They have 30 days to respond. From now on, silence is strategy. I replied, understood. In February, the Maricopa County Courthouse was busier than usual. The local papers called it the case of the son suing his mother and the mother countersuing her son. I walked down the hallway, coat neat, hair tied back. Rebecca walked beside me, holding a thick folder against her chest. The courtroom doors opened. Ethan sat across the aisle, head drooping into his collar, looking worn. Lydia had lost weight, clutching a crumpled tissue. The judge called the case. Their attorney rose first, voice familiar. My clients only sought to protect. They were concerned about Mrs. Hayes, who had made hasty financial decisions. The judge raised a hand slightly. We'll get to that. Defense? Rebecca stood. Your Honor, we will present evidence in 3 groups. She placed the folder on the clerk's desk. First group, mental competency. 3 physicians, 3 independent institutions. Their conclusions are identical. Mrs. Hayes is fully lucid. 3 thick, color-tabbed binders were laid neatly on the desk. Second group, audio evidence. A recording from Thanksgiving Day in which Mr. Ethan Hayes acknowledges the existence of the purchase contract, the escrow transfer, and the transaction timeline. Third group, falsified documentation. The emergency guardianship petition bearing the signature of Phillips, M.D., without any direct examination. On the recovered original, fingerprint analysis confirmed Miss Lydia Hayes's print in the lower left corner of page 3. The courtroom shifted. The clerk inserted a USB drive. Rebecca gave a nod. From the speakers came the scrape of a chair, the slide of a drawer, the rustle of papers, and Ethan's broken voice. Deposit receipt. Escrow. It's in. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the air conditioning. Rebecca gestured to stop playback. Your Honor, said the prosecutor present as an observer due to the forgery element standing. We've reviewed the document. The fingerprint on the emergency petition matches Miss Lydia Hayes's record. The signature of Dr. Phillips in the medical certification section is unsupported by any examination file. The document shows signs of fabrication. There is a potential criminal element. Their lawyer shot up. Objection. A fingerprint doesn't prove criminal intent. My client may have handled the papers without knowing, Rebecca replied crisply. The marginal notes, written by Mr. Ethan Hayes, list, accounts, estimated home value, and file before Thanksgiving. That's a plan, not an accident. The judge turned his pen slowly, then looked at their table. Mr. Hayes, Miss Hayes, would you like to respond? Ethan stood. Mother provoked us, he said, swallowing hard. She disappeared during the holiday meal and scared everyone. We were only worried. We thought someone had manipulated her into selling the house. Rebecca opened her flat case and drew a single sheet. This is an email exchange between the 2 defendants, obtained through electronic warrant, dated the week before Thanksgiving. She looked up at the judge. The final line from Mr. Ethan Hayes reads, In 2 weeks, the house will be ours. She paused. Permission to play a supplemental clip recorded after the call when he thought the line was disconnected. The speakers crackled again. Ethan's short, low laugh played through clearly. It's done. The house will be ours. Ethan dropped back into his chair, eyes fixed on the floor. Lydia broke down, the tissue crushed in her hand. The judge's face remained still. He reviewed the papers, drew a single line across his notes. Mrs. Hayes, he said, would you like to speak before I render judgment? I stood. I worked 40 years to build a roof over my head. I sold my home for peace. I don't want my children in prison. I only want to be left in peace and for them to learn the lesson they earned." He nodded. Noted. He set his pen down. The court finds, first, no evidence indicates that Mrs. Hayes lacks capacity. Medical records affirm her lucidity. Second, the emergency guardianship petition shows evidence of forged medical signatures and interference by the defendants. The fingerprint of defendant Lydia Hayes is present on the document. Third, the audio and digital communications demonstrate intent to seize assets through legal manipulation. Accordingly, the court rules in favor of Mrs. Hayes. Defendants Ethan Hayes and Lydia Hayes are jointly ordered to pay $95,000 in damages, including legal fees and related costs. The falsified documentation will be referred to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. The gavel struck once, twice, 3 times cold and final. The courtroom fell silent, sealed like a warehouse. In the back row, some shook their heads, others bowed them. Ethan didn't look up. Lydia pressed a hand to her forehead. Their lawyer leaned in to whisper. No one replied. Rebecca slowly closed her folder, slipped her pen into her case, and signaled me to stay seated until the room thinned out. Outside, a local reporter called out, "Mrs. Hayes, any comment?" I looked into the dark camera lens and said simply, "I believe in documents and in the court." Then I walked past. In the elevator, Rebecca said, "The hardest part's over. What remains is civil enforcement and the criminal review of the forged records. Just wait for notification. Don't respond to any direct contact from them." "I'll do exactly that," I said. We stepped into the parking lot. Sunlight spilled onto the concrete. I leaned against my car door, taking a deep breath. A light breeze passed, not scented, not sharp, but enough to let me feel something slip away. Ethan appeared a few dozen feet away, one hand in his pocket, the other loosening his tie. He walked slowly, stopped a few paces from me. His lips moved. No sound came. I didn't step forward. Rebecca stood beside me, silent. He turned and left. I opened the car, placed the folder on the passenger seat. Before getting in, I said quietly to Rebecca, "There's no joy in a victory when the one who loses is your own child. But sometimes, justice has to be cold." She nodded, her expression neither soft nor hard. "You've done your part right." A year after the trial, Phoenix had changed seasons several times. I'd grown used to the short streets, the familiar supermarkets, and the small kitchen in my rented apartment. Each morning, I opened my black notebook and crossed out one more task from the enforcement paperwork. There was no glorious victory, just a series of small wire transfers, faint as drizzle. The first notice came by mail. Seizure and liquidation of assets, old pickup truck, several electronic items, furniture. The recovered amount was negligible. A month later, my account received the first payment, barely enough to buy a new oven. I immediately donated it to the Elder Financial Protection Fund. In the notebook, I wrote, "Payment Hasson donated." Not out of virtue, I simply needed to do something decent so my hands wouldn't shake when reading documents with my son's name on them. I heard rumors that Ethan had lost his job. An old neighbor texted me, "He's been missing work too often." Someone came asking questions at the office. A week later, a letter from the enforcement office arrived. Remaining loan, seized by creditor, personal assets repossessed. Lydia disappeared from social media for nearly half a year. When she returned, her profile photo showed a blurry backyard, white-painted doors, East Coast style. Someone said she'd left Arizona to live with her sister in another state. A few weeks later, Rebecca forwarded me an internal memo leak. Lydia's insurance company had confirmed termination of employment. No reason listed. I folded my phone shut, sat still, listening to the air conditioner hum. I wondered how many lies a person must tell before the final sentence written about them becomes simply employment terminated. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter. The envelope was wrinkled, ink smudged along the edge. Ethan's handwriting hurried, unsteady. I sat at the table and opened it. It read, "Mom, I'm sorry. I've lost everything. I'm living in the old pickup, parked behind a warehouse. I just want you to know I regret it. I'm not making excuses. I dream about the old house every night. If you want, I'll pay what I still owe, even if it's just a little each month. I'm sorry." I read it once, then folded it neatly. The old truck, I knew its color, the scratches on the driver's door. I remembered it parked in the driveway during past holidays, loaded with boxes. A useless question crossed my mind. At what point did those boxes slowly turn into stacks of legal papers? I put the letter in a drawer. I didn't reply. I didn't want to write a single sentence that could pull me into another round of explanations. A few nights later, an email came from Lydia. Subject line, from Lydia. The message was long, part confession, part apology. She wrote, "I've lost everything. I'm truly scared. I'm asking for your forgiveness, not to return, but so I won't be haunted anymore." At the end, a soft line. "You once said forgiveness is how we sleep in peace. Can you help me sleep in peace?" I read it all, then closed the laptop. I remembered a night years ago, standing in the kitchen just a few steps from them, hearing them count my bank accounts as if counting cups. I remembered the drawer sliding open that Thanksgiving day. I remembered the words, escrow. It's in. Forgiveness. I could hold that word, turn it over like a smooth stone. But forgetting that word was never within my reach. I didn't reply to Lydia. I didn't force myself to write anyone's closure for them. Subsequent payments from the court came in fits and starts a few $100s, sometimes more. I never touched them. Each time, I transferred them directly to the fund. By midsummer, I drove up to Sedona. Red sunlight reflected off the rocks. I won't describe the landscape. I was there to find a small house with enough light, enough quiet, enough solidity to stand against the wind and Sunday. The realtor showed me 3 places. The second was just right. Good wood floors, sturdy roof, windows facing the hillside, a small patio with space for a wooden table and 2 chairs. I stood at the doorway and ran my hand along the frame. It felt like checking the soundness of a bridge, feeling the quiet, solid hum through my palm. "I'll take this one," I said. The realtor smiled. "Congratulations. The purchase process was simple this time. I used my own money, no loans. The new house didn't need much decorating. I hammered a few loose nails, adjusted a crooked kitchen cabinet, set a rocking chair on the porch. That first evening, I opened my mailbox and found a letter from the fund. "Thank you for your contribution. Your donation directly supports our free legal aid program." I placed the letter on the table. It didn't feel noble, just procedural. But sometimes, procedure is what keeps you from collapsing into softness. One evening, as the last light clung to the hills, I picked up Ethan's letter again. I read it slowly. At the bottom, a line I'd missed before. "I don't expect you to reply." I set the letter down and leaned back in my chair. Forgiveness is how you sleep in peace, yes. I've been able to sleep. But it isn't the kind of sleep with beautiful dreams. It's the sleep of someone who's carried a bag of cement, set it down in the right place, and forgotten how tired they were. I spoke softly, as if to the man in the photo frame who'd followed me to Sedona. "I'm not happy to have won," I said. "I'm just calmer. The missing part in between, you know it can't be filled. But I'm still standing." The next morning I went out to buy plants, 2 pots of lavender, a sage bush, and some wild daisies. I placed them by the wall, filled the soil, pressed it firm with my hands. A new neighbor, an older, retired teacher, walked by and smiled. "Hello, neighbor." I nodded, introduced myself, said nothing more. She didn't ask. Here, people are polite enough to keep their distance. That suits me. At noon, my phone buzzed. A strange number, from another state. I let it ring. A text followed. "Mom, I know you don't want to hear from me. I just wanted to tell you I found a night shift job at the warehouse. I'm making payments." I read it, then deleted it. Not out of cruelty, but because I'd decided not to nurture any story other than my own life. That night, dry wind swept through the porch. I opened my black notebook to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, "Sedona Plan." Below it, 3 lines. "Walk every morning, fix the bookshelf, learn the names of the stars." I drew a small box beside each line to check off later. I closed the notebook, leaned back in the rocking chair, and listened to the still air. The scar somewhere in my chest still tugged when I breathed deep, but it stayed quiet. I knew it would never disappear, and I didn't need it to. Summer in Sedona isn't loud. It moves through my days in small habits, like bricks laid neatly in line, watering the plants, wiping the kitchen counter, writing a few lines in the black notebook. Every morning, I make a cup of coffee and stand on the porch, watching the first streak of light crawl across the red earth. No need for big thoughts. I just check 3 things: the door lock, the water flow, and whether my heart is still beating steady. My new neighbor, a retired teacher named Carol, sometimes walks by and waves. "Good morning, Margaret." "Good morning," I reply. One day she brings over a slice of baked pie. "I made too much," she says. I thank her, cut it in half, eat one part, put the other in the fridge. We've never asked each other about the past. Here, people understand the right to silence. I tend my garden like a breathing exercise. The lavender pots have taken to the sun, their stems standing straight. I pack more soil around the roots, my hands no longer tremble. At noon, I rearrange my bookshelf. A few volumes on structures, old notebooks from my engineering days, and one small photo frame. I place the frame in the center, not for decoration, but so that when I need to look, I only have to lift my head. That afternoon, I cleaned out the desk drawer looking for a roll of tape. Small things rolled around: markers, a ruler, a paper clip, and one small, cold object lay diagonally across the bottom, an old key. It used to hang by the door in Scottsdale, worn smooth at the tip from years of brushing against other keys. I had no idea how it made its way here. I picked it up, cold, solid. It felt like touching an old steel beam in a new construction site. I stood, locked the house, and slipped the key into my pocket. The dirt path leading to the canyon rim was only a few minutes' walk. I wasn't thinking about ritual, only finality. The wind pushed the dry earth scent into my collar. Insects buzzed in scattered rhythm. At the edge, I stopped and opened my palm. The bit of metal caught the light. I remembered those last days in the old house, my hand also holding a key, but that time I'd turned it away from my life with a signature on a document. Today, there were no signatures, only release. The key fell without a sound, disappearing into the rock below like a small, tidy period at the end of a long sentence. My shoulders loosened. Such a simple motion, yet it had taken a year for my hands to be ready. On the way back, my phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number, old area code. I didn't answer. A text appeared. "Mom, I'm sorry. I hope one day you'll talk to me." No name, but I knew it was Ethan. Standing in the cypress shade, I read it twice, then opened the keyboard. I typed a few lines, erased them, and finally wrote the sentence I'd carried since leaving the old house. "You have exactly what you built, and so do I." I pressed send. The screen went quiet again. One last action, block number. Back home, I set the phone face down on the table, no more vibrations. I washed my hands and made a simple dinner: spaghetti and sprouts. As the water boiled, I opened the black notebook and checked a box on the page titled Sedona Plan. Learn the names of the stars. Beside it, I added, "Start tonight." I turned on the porch light and brought my chair outside. The sky wasn't fully dark yet, a soft gray fading upward. I opened a stargazing app on my phone, silenced it, and lifted it to the sky. The names appeared like tiny stickers. I read them quietly, not trying to memorize. The imaginary lines connecting those lights reminded me of how people link events to tell a story. Every story needs its lines. I just choose to draw as few as possible. Carol passed by, holding a trash bag. "Evening's gentle," she said. "Gentle indeed," I replied. She paused for a moment, looking out into the distance. "The wind here makes people quieter," she said. "Yes," I said. She walked off. I leaned back in the chair, listening to the thickening sound of crickets. The feeling in my chest was like a scar that had sealed, no longer bleeding, but still aching when I breathed deep. I placed my hand there not to soothe, but to acknowledge, it's there. It belongs to me. No one else gets to touch it. Inside, I washed the dishes and turned off the kitchen light. In the small office, I stacked my papers into a box, the court folder at the bottom, the black notebook on top. I locked the drawer, hearing that familiar click. That sound had followed me all this way, locking the door, locking the notebook, locking the phone. Not a final closure, just a way of keeping things where they belong. I sat down and wrote a short passage on the notebook's last page. They tried to bury me with greed and lies, but I used those same bricks to build my wall of peace. I set the pen down. No underline, no emphasis. The sentence stood alone, straight as a steel beam. The phone stayed silent. I reopened my sent message, looked at those few plain words. No triumph, no pity, just truth. My son had built his story with margin notes, a borrowed signature, and the sound of a drawer sliding open. I had built mine with a notebook, with files, with quiet decisions no one heard. Each outcome fit cleanly into one sentence. You have exactly what you built, and so do I. There was no victory to celebrate, only a life to keep building, layer by layer, line by line. I was the one who'd learned how to set beams, so I kept setting them. And when I turned off the living room light, I heard myself whisper, not a prayer, not a promise, enough. The story you just heard is a work of fiction, but every breath, every glance, every cold, deliberate choice in it touches a raw truth. That sometimes, the most powerless person in a home is the only one clear-minded enough to uphold justice. Names and details have been changed to protect the identities of those who might be recognized. We're not telling this story to glorify revenge, but to remind you, there are women who, when cornered, don't scream, they plan. Step by step, line by line, they reclaim their lives with a precision colder than any verdict. If you were Margaret Hayes, would you stay silent and let yourself be erased from your own life? Or would you stand up and use the very law they tried to destroy you with to teach them what justice truly means? This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's an engraving of clarity, pride, and the endurance of someone once mistaken for weak. If you've ever been doubted, ever been forced into silence in your own home, leave a comment. And if you believe that true justice doesn't need to shout, it only needs to stand tall, share this video. Somewhere, someone might need to know that they still have the right to say, enough. Don't forget to subscribe, because here, every story is a reminder. Justice isn't a lightning strike, it's the steady hand that puts everything back where it belongs. On the final screen, we've left you with 2 more stories of defiance, redemption, and the quiet strength of ordinary people who dared to walk through the storm. Trust me, you won't be able to look away.